in this digital world, it's really easy to forget the person in front of us and the person on the other side of the phone. Without people knowing what's happening, without knowing how people are getting tricked into this, without exposing the shame of I got scammed out of my life savings and I'm not telling anyone about it, all of the shame that festers in that place, as we shine light on it, as we talk about it, as it becomes common knowledge, it's not just knowledge, it's people, and it's people's stories, and darkness has to flee.
Joining me at the mics today are Jake Sims, a leading expert on transnational crime and human rights in Southeast Asia, and a fellow at the Harvard University Asia Center. Hi, Jake.
Hi, thanks for having us.
And Amy Miller, Southeast Asia Director of Acts of Mercy International. Hi, Amy.
Hi there.
So the FBI reports that Americans lost more than $12.5 billion to online fraud in 2023. And as online life becomes increasingly ubiquitous, even for the elderly, that number continues to grow. Whether you've received a suspicious email, a random text from a stranger, or have connected with a potential love interest on a dating app only to have things start to smell a little fishy, you've probably interacted at least once with a potential scam. But the reality is bigger than just the person who loses money by giving away their bank account number. Behind that email or text or voice on the phone is a person, another human, whose studies are beginning to reveal may be just as vulnerable as the person being scammed. Amy, I've read that scamming is the fastest growing form of modern slavery in the world. Who controls the scamming industry right now, and how did this all start?
Yeah, so it's really, like you said, it's the fastest growing organized or modern day slavery that we're experiencing. And I think one thing people don't really even recognize is that, you know, you're getting scammed on your phone, but then you've got these people, and that's who I deal with, is people on the other side that are all throughout Southeast Asia that have been lured there with promises of work. And they have traveled, and it is, once they get there, they are locked up into these massive compounds that are run by the Chinese organized crime syndicate. And they are forced for up to 18 hours a day to send those texts that you all are getting and work in this horrific industry that has victims on every side of it.
Jake, why Southeast Asia? Why does scamming seem to cluster here?
So this is emerging out of what you could term as a migration of sophisticated organized criminals into the region over the last several decades, into areas that have significant gaps in rule of law and governance. And so countries like Cambodia, Myanmar, Laos, where this isn't just garden variety corruption, but actually entire state systems are involved in profiting from this, supporting it, and sustaining the criminals behind it.
And there's a lot of wealth that they're accumulating, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You can see that wealth. It's visible hyper wealth in places like Phnom Penh, where there are potholes through the streets and telephone wires hanging down 3 feet off the ground, and Rolls Royces and Bentleys and Lamborghinis driving through. And so the difference between the people who are on the take on industries like this and the average person living in these contexts around Southeast Asia is really shocking. It's visceral.
I think the numbers would boggle anyone's mind as far as the amount of money and how profitable this is. Scamming worldwide is a multi-trillion-dollar industry, but even, you know, in our borderline where we live, we're talking $90 billion a year is what's being scammed. It's just, it really does boggle the mind. And that money pops up in different places. Like Jake said, you see it on the ground, but you're also just seeing it go into coffers of mafias around Asia.
Amy, how much of that money does the person on the phone or the app actually end up seeing?
Oh, often they see no money at all. Every once in a while, you'll get somebody who gets paid, a couple $100s. But generally, a lot of these people are slave labor. They are not only not making any money, but they are actually, if they don't hit their targets, they are then being beaten and tortured for not not complying or not hitting their targets. So there is a lot of money to be made, but the people on the phone making the scams are not making the money.
Jake, as a consumer, where would I see these sorts of schemes showing up? Who is particularly being targeted?
So you're going to see them basically everywhere that you interact with the digital landscape. So SMS texts, encrypted messaging, messages on major social media platforms, dating apps, on and on and on. And that's one of the things also that is really interesting about this and making it so hard to combat is that this isn't just elder fraud. This isn't targeting your main demographics that you would expect stereotypically that scams will target. This is targeting everyone. There's a story recently of a CEO of a bank who got so convinced that he had found a legitimate crypto investment opportunity that he actually illegally removed $47 million from his bank to try to fund this scam, and it actually shut the bank down. It removed so much money from the bank, it shut this community bank down. And so it's everyone. It's very, people who you would not expect to be vulnerable to scams are falling prey to this.
How do they get Americans' phone numbers and identifying information? I mean, how do I get a text from someone that says, hey, I'd like to invite you to dinner, and I think, I don't know this person. How did they get my phone number?
Well, they're doing, say, two different approaches. One is just blanket coverage, just messaging every number that exists. And then the other is they're actually going and targeting people who they think might have enough money. And so they're sort of hitting this from both sides. And I think it's important to recognize that this is a significant difference from other forms of scams that have plagued the US and other countries over the years, in that it is not just the people scamming that are involved. There's actually a really complex and sophisticated infrastructure around this, service industries, money laundering infrastructure. The scripts that they're using are being constantly revised and A/B tested and improved. And so they're using extremely sophisticated means to get the numbers and then also to execute the scams themselves.
Amy, it sounds like this terrible tangled web of people who are being victimized in this industry. So when we talk about the typical victim, I read that people are responding to these opportunities, quote unquote, job opportunities from as far away as Ethiopia. How does a person in continental Africa find out about a job in Myanmar, and what would convince them to go all that way to be involved in something that they really don't know very much about?
Yeah, so they're incredibly sophisticated in their recruitment tactics, in the way that they are exploiting people around the world. A lot of them they're targeting. We're having high populations from countries like Ethiopia, other Eastern African nations, sub-Asia, subcontinent, so India, Sri Lanka. But a lot of these places are either unstable themselves, or you have an educated population that then the society doesn't support jobs for them. These are groups of people that are used to traveling for work. They may have traveled to Dubai already and worked somewhere. They have a higher risk threshold, but they are also used to finding jobs. So they may find a job online or on a Telegram group or on Facebook or kind of the Meta platform. They might find a job posting. They will also they've developed a system where now they have recruiters inside the compounds that are calling family members or friends or old colleagues and saying, I found an amazing job. They are not calling them to Myanmar, because no one would go to war-torn Myanmar. They're calling them, in my case, they're calling them to Bangkok. They have legitimate websites. They have a whole interview process that they go through. It looks very legitimate all the way up until they literally have a gun shoved in their face and they're pushed across a river and then they're behind barbed wire. So it's incredibly sophisticated. But again, they're used to working. These are people migrating for work and on the move, and they're leaving their environment that is maybe unstable or not suitable for work.
I think that's really helpful to clarify, because I think for some folks, as they hear about scamming or even some human trafficking, they think, well, if you were smarter, you would notice the warning signals here. You wouldn't get involved. But what I'm hearing here is that there are people who have perhaps backgrounds in IT, who are well educated, that the sophistication here is really insidious, so that when they find out they're being forced seems like an important word here, to continue in these work practices, they're actually really shocked. Is that right, Jake?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. And just emphasizing Amy's point, like what we're looking at here is likely the most sophisticated and powerful criminal industry in history. And so this idea that you somehow are going to be protected by basic common sense or awareness is pretty flawed. And that's proving itself to be the case both for trafficking victims and scam victims. And it's why we're seeing, the type of person that Amy is describing is not your stereotypical trafficking victim. If you look at the dominant paradigm of trafficking in the region, it's generally people from very rural areas, poorly educated, extremely vulnerable. And those folks are still vulnerable to this, but in large part, the demographic has shifted and expanded dramatically as the sophistication and the power and connectivity of these groups have expanded. And the same thing is happening for downstream victims of the scams itself. Again, it's not just the vulnerable, the tech non-fluent, the elderly. This is everyone who's vulnerable to this.
So when you discover that this kind of scamming is going on, Amy, particularly for you overseas, how do you see local governments respond? Are they cooperative?
I think that question really depends on the government. We know that there are about over 70 nations represented of victims from around the world. And so to answer that question broadly is impossible, right? Every one of those countries is having a very different response. I would say some are very active and very engaged in both seeking to repatriate their people, seeking to rescue their people out of these compounds, as well as preventing on the home front more and more people, as well as on the criminal justice side when they have recruiters or they're trying to figure out who the agents are that are back home that are recruiting people. There are some countries that are very engaged in that. And then unfortunately, we have many countries that for whatever reason have a bias and say, well, these people got themselves there, or these people are scammers. There is often a because of the nature of this trafficking, there's just a stigma that goes alongside of it because it's scammers. So everyone thinks, oh, they went there knowingly or they wanted to scam. And so that can sometimes hinder a response on their governments. I would also say, though, something we're really struggling with is just any sort of coordinated response. We live in a globalized world. This is happening not only just in, our individual countries in Southeast Asia, but it's replicating itself around the globe, and we are on the back foot. We are not responding quick enough. We are not coordinating ourselves across governments and across law enforcement, even civil society. There's just a lot of gaps there that really need to increase in order for us to fight this well.
And Jake, that sort of boggles my mind, because it's not like we don't have drone footage or satellite images to be able to see these massive compounds where people are being held. Have we been turning a blind eye to this for a very long time?
Yes. And part of that, part of that is coming from the fact that we as moderns put a lot of our faith in state systems to protect us, and then our big corporations to guide us in how to engage with a digital era. And in a very real way, those systems, the most powerful systems in the world, big tech and governments around the world, are at the very center of what is driving this. And so one, that means that there are very powerful forces that are working and conspiring against having this sort of laid out and seen and heard and thought about clearly. And it also just means that we have an inherent bias not to understand what's going on and not to respond to it effectively. And when you look at the response to this point, if you were going to say, like, who are the two biggest enablers of this, a government like Cambodia that is feigning a response, but clearly profiting at a level at which is actually sustaining the ruling party's grip on power, right? And then secondly, a massive tech platform like Meta, where we know that 85 or 90% of all the trafficking and all the scams are happening on those platforms. And you know, you look to a massive state or a massive corporation, and you just want to believe that when they say they're acting in good faith that they are, and there's just not a lot of evidence of that. And I think you know, people have a hard time grappling with that level of complicity with such a heinous thing.
Amy, let's say I'm a mom, and I have come from Uganda to respond to a job interview and a job post. I want to take care of my family, and I find myself in your region of the world, and I'm in one of these compounds. Talk me through what a rescue looks like. How do I get out?
Yeah, unfortunately, not quick enough and not easily enough. They are, again, where Jake's worked in Cambodia and where I work in Myanmar are two different situations. Although unfortunately, getting out is a very complicated process. Where we are, they are guarded by armed militia. They are across a river. They are in, you know, a war-torn country. Often, there are main kind of two ways to get out. The first one is they pay a ransom, and I would say that's the vast majority of the way people get out. Often those ransoms are anywhere between $2,000 and $20,000. So if you've come and you're working and you're not getting paid, and sometimes you paid money or you sold property to pay for your flight to get there because this is the dream job that you've been waiting for to supply for your family, you get there and you have nothing. I get texts all the time that say they want $5,000. I have no money. My family has no money. So they're just stuck there. But for those that can, again, families can sell. We've had many families sell property in order to pay the ransom to get them out. That's the main way. The other way would be more of a government negotiation. And those are really few and far between, where a government is active or has enough diplomatic power or will to really work to get them out. Very rarely do we get escapes. Very rarely does somebody just get released. So for a lot of these people, it is months, if not years, for some of them that they're stuck inside of these places.
And what kind of care do people need as they leave? I mean, your entire organization is about caring for victims. What is the psychological trauma of being sequestered and forced to lie day after day?
Yeah, I always say that there's such a complex trauma associated with this type of victim, because not only are you often punished physically, you're in a like draconian type of environment for many months where it's dog eat dog, and there's just a psychological torture that happens there. But then you also have a shame and a guilt for all of the money that you've stolen from other people, because you chose to do the scamming in order to not get electrocuted or not get beaten. And so often we get victims, they either pay a ransom or they manage to escape or get over. We're with them for 24 to 72 hours. Generally, it's a very quick period of time. And for that, it's just a matter of getting them safe, making them feel like they're not in that environment anymore. Often there's medical needs that are needed, or just sleep because they've kept them awake or they're working through the night. So it's just a matter of really just like basic needs at first. And then we really do get the privilege to often be the first ones to hear their story. And mostly what they need is just to be listened to and just to be heard. And for us, it's not really anything new under the sun, but for them, it's the first time that they've unpacked some of that trauma. We don't try to do deep psychological healing or trauma recovery in that moment. That's not really the time, because they're still very much in the throes of what's going to happen to them and how are they going to get home. But it's a privilege to get to be a voice of compassion and presence with them, and to make them feel dignified again once they've been just in a dehumanizing environment for so long.
Jake, as I listen to this, I think that there are two sort of responses that are necessary here. First, I mean, there's how do consumers protect themselves, which seems to be a big part of, we're not feeding the system, shall we say, but also a response to what is happening overseas here. And that I feel like consumers can feel kind of powerless. How do you address these twin needs in ways that consumers can feel a sense of agency?
That's a great question. And I think because of the breadth and novelty of how this is impacting, a lot of it goes back to a need for greater and deeper awareness and a specific type of awareness, because you have like a basically globally spanning, really, really powerful criminal network here. And the way that you are going to get a response is by getting people enraged, equipped with the right solutions, and then getting the people who actually have access to seats of power to mobilize. And so there's been tons of reporting on this, right? There's been lots of stories. It's a global media cycle. But there's a real value here in people engaging with content that can build a sense of common humanity. And so I see a real value in long form storytelling, like the podcast that Amy and I have been involved in, that it actually allows us to sit with the story of characters who have been impacted at the very bottom of this, and then start to peel back the layers of that story in a way that doesn't just shock, but actually can move people towards action. And that is what Escaping Scam City is trying to do through the story of Micah and Ava.
I appreciate that you brought up the podcast, Jake. And listeners, we will, the audio clip that you heard at the beginning of this segment is from that newly released Escaping Scam City podcast, where you'll find more from Jake and Amy, and we'll link to that in our show notes for you. But I love that you used that word enraged, because if you go to YouTube, there's all kinds of content about scammers. I was talking to my kids about this, and they say, "Oh, Mom, have you seen Scammer Payback?" I went online, and sure, yeah, I can watch this tech-savvy person who is targeting scammers and exposing them. But I come away from that content, just as you say, Jake, feeling enraged, not feeling a sense of common humanity. But Amy, as a person of faith, it seems like that common humanity is essential, because I don't want to participate in contributing to the shame that you're talking about, that even people a world away can feel a sense of burden that they contributed to someone's financial downfall, or, a love relationship that they thought was real being shattered. Talk to me about this as a person of faith coming to this idea of common humanity and shared stories.
Yeah, I think Jake talked about awareness, and again, that almost sometimes feels at this point like, yeah, just get aware. But I really, really believe with this issue, especially that while there's been a lot of understanding and global kind of recognition and press on the issue, I am still amazed. I do this every day, all day. I'm still amazed that I meet people, even in the city I live in Asia, that don't know what's happening. And so it is really important, because instead of it just being this scam thing or, oh yeah, trafficking that we can't connect to, where this is very different is these people are on your phone. Like, they're literally texting you. You have connection to human trafficking victims that you're not even aware of, right? And so you get mad, or you want to block it, which you should. You don't want your number in circulation. But the reality is, this is a person with a story, with a with humanity. I don't know how else to describe it, except that they the way that you want promise for your family and for your future, that is why they've gotten into this in the same way. And I think it's, in this digital world, it's really easy to forget the person in front of us and the person on the other side of the phone. And I think as Christians and as believers, that's why I said the awareness thing, this festers in darkness. Like, we know evil festers in darkness, and that without people knowing what's happening, without knowing how people are getting tricked into this, without exposing the shame of I got scammed out of my life savings and I'm not telling anyone about it, all of the shame that festers in that place, as we shine light on it, as we talk about it, as it becomes common knowledge, it's not just knowledge, it's people, and it's people's stories, and darkness has to flee, right? That's what light does. And so it really matters that we talk about it, and that we tell our friends about it, and that it becomes part of kind of the common vernacular, not only scamming, but the trafficking piece of this, and the organized crime piece of this.
Clarissa, as Christians, we're ultimately called to care for the least of these, right? And in our society, who is lower than a slave and a scammer? Like, those are the people that are lowest. And then in a sort of hyper-productive, developed society, if you're going to put a third person down there, it's someone who gets duped, right? And so, like, it is only going to be by immersing with stories of that kind of loss and exploitation that we're going to be able to develop these new pathways to have empathy for and concern with those type of people that our society views as the least. And it's only once we have that empathy, once that's established, that's when we are going to be able to start establishing solidarity with those people, which is ultimately what we're called to as people of faith.
Well, this is certainly hard work, and Jake and Amy, thank you so much for engaging in it nonetheless. Listeners, again, we will place a link to the Escaping Scam City podcast in our show notes. I've listened to all of the episodes and found them really compelling. And when you get a weird text on your phone next time, or a strange message in your Instagram DMs, go ahead and pray for the person who sent that text. Listen to the full episode wherever podcasts are found.